welcome to KoshienCast, the weekly sports anime fan podcast. My name is Matt, and joining me is a very special guest, Stephanie.
Hi!
So, you might have expected Matt, because it's always Matt on the other end of the line, and he will be with us shortly. But the question of the week for, this fourth week of the summer anime season related to our partners. So it was the third part of our question from earlier from a listener, and he asked what our partners thought of the podcast. And so I have a partner, and her name is Stephanie, and she's my wife. I took some time off in April to get married to her. And she's, been aware of this pretty much from the beginning. So I'm interested, Stephanie, if you'd like to describe what's your perception of KoshienCast.
Wow. Well, first of all, I'm flattered and honored to be included on the podcast.
You're the first non-Matt.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm curious as to this listener, what prompted him to think about your significant others. But I don't know. Honestly, I would say my thoughts about the podcast maybe start with my thoughts about anime, which wasn't much until we started dating.
Right.
I never watched anime. I didn't know anything about it. I still know hardly anything. So I'm just glad that you have somebody else to nerd out with.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Because the alternative is me having to talk to you about all this stuff.
And me, nodding and, kind of smiling and being like, sure, okay.
Right. But that's the thing, though, is that because of KoshienCast, there have been a few shows that you've followed along with that I might not have gotten into, you might not have watched otherwise.
That's true. And I feel like through that, then I've also learned a little bit about, Japanese culture, which is fun. Mm-hmm. And just something, being exposed to something new I would never have sought. On my own, so that's exciting. Yeah, and now we can sing the theme song to Yuri on Ice together. Yeah, that's true. Even though I'd mumble most of the words.
That's okay. I don't mind leading on that one. So I guess my other thought is, how often do you feel like me having to record this silly podcast once a week gets in the way of things or makes life difficult?
Not very often. I think... I don't know. I guess sometimes the thing that is the most annoying is just that you talk for over an hour in our small house.
we try to keep it under an hour now, but yeah,
and that's hard for me then to focus on other things when you're talking, which is fine, but it's very minimal in terms of a distraction.
Yeah, we do have a pretty small space, but I can definitely see that, and we're trying to do it when people aren't busy, but I do appreciate your generosity in allowing me and my friend Matt to do this silly thing we care about.
Yay! Somebody's got to care about sports anime.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Why not you?
Why not us? All right, well, Stephanie, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna pass it over to the other Matt.
Bye.
Thanks, Matt and Stephanie. So, to follow up on that question there, since it was directed towards both of us, my partner thinks nothing, because I don't actually have a partner. I am currently single, and I do have a roommate. He doesn't really care at all about the podcast, to be honest. He's maybe watched an episode or two with me, or he's kind of come out into our living area and noticed me watching and is like, hey, that looks stupid. But that's about the extent of what he's done. Cool, well, so thank you so much for the questions, Matt. Or Matt L, as it were. So if you have any more questions, please send us some questions to KoshienCast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear more from you guys. It's always super fun for us to get those types of questions from y'all. Cool. So going on to our new episode, we are on week 4 of the summer season, covering all anime from July 23rd to July 29th. So you may have noticed that Matt has not said anything in probably over about a minute now or so. So he and Stephanie had some personal business to attend to over the weekend. So I will be covering Welcome to the Ballroom and Dive by myself. We will be doing that later in the episode. First, we're going to be covering Fastest Finger First, Big Wind Up, and Clean Freak Aoyama. One quick thing to note, we had recorded this a few days ago. Unfortunately, we only noticed now that we lost about 15 seconds of audio during the discussion of Fastest Finger First. We'll put a time code in the notes at the bottom, but just keep that in mind that when Matt starts talking about certain relationships to Fukami, there is going to be a cutout there. So anyway, with all that in mind, why don't we quickly move on to Fastest Finger First?
Right, so we're going to start off with Fastest Finger First, episode 4. This episode has really two main sections. The first section is focused on Koshiyama and Inoue deciding, ultimately, and not surprisingly, to join the Quiz Bowl Club. So they spend their first meeting learning some of the basics about Quiz Bowl, about how different questions are structured, as well as having a mini Quiz Bowl session to help learn some of the differences between styles of questions. Then in the second part, you have a couple shorter segments. You see some cutaways with Fukami's brother, possibly. You see Fukami talking with her friend Yuki about how Fukami actually wanted to go get to Asagaoka initially. And then the episode ends with a mysterious girl who appeared at the beginning of the episode riding on Sasajima's bike, showing up and eating Koshiyama's lunch, talking about electronics, and then running away. And the episode ends with Fukami upset for reasons she does not completely understand about how some other girl was eating Koshiyama's lunch and it wasn't her.
Right. So, I'm kind of two minds with this episode. I did like this episode overall. I thought it was another fairly strong episode. I liked seeing a lot more of their daily life. I like kind of how they're portraying Buso High School as being this sort of underdog school. The fact that they can't even afford the quiz equipment.
Yeah, the buzzers. They don't have their own buzzers, so I didn't mention it. But when they do their little mock round, they're just using a calculator. So they all press on a calculator, and whoever presses a number first gets to answer the question.
Right, exactly. And I think that was actually the strongest scene in the episode. Just like their little their sort of beginner's quiz game. It established a lot without feeling too needlessly wordy. Like, I really liked Sasajima, kind of explaining to them, it's like, why do you people care about winning? Like, you don't really know Quiz Bowl.
Yeah, exactly. You have to learn about how to play Quiz Bowl before you can worry about beating someone.
Right.
What I was gonna say about it, it stuck out to me was the pace. That might have been the worst sentence I've ever said. Because
Matt, your worst sentence is still probably 10 times better than probably some of my normal sentences, so you're good.
Oh, wow. Thanks. The pacing of the episode was something I appreciated because it has a balance where it still feels like there's some forward momentum to the show, while at the same time it's not rushing, Right. You could see it would be very easy for them to have the introduction, they join the club, and then effectively have a fast forward where they're getting ready to go to their first real tournament by the end of the episode or something. And a lot of shows rush people straight into competition before they've really established the characters or established how the competition even works. I'm looking at you. Welcome to the ballroom. And I applaud the show for not feeling that pressure to jump right in, and for even having a character say, we're not ready to compete until you understand what you're doing, you know?
Right, basically. Like, hey, you know what? We need to, like, you guys to actually develop your love for the game first. Like, you need to figure out why you guys are actually playing. Like,
right.
you haven't really earned the right to act, like, you haven't really earned, like, the desire to win or lose yet.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that, and I liked how, during this quiz game, it kind of came out how, like, each of these different players, they're all gonna have their specialties, like, Toshiyama's gonna be great with, like, history stuff and, like, classical literature. Fukami is more, like, style of life, that sort of subject.
Well, and she knows the classics, so
right,
and
she knows,
the big
like,
thing is she understands Quiz Bowl, basically.
Right. Yeah. And then we also have Inoue, who he was kind of being built up as being a joke character. He still kind of is, but I like that he still has a niche on the team because he knows the weird nerdy questions that they sometimes throw on there. Because let's face it, all of the Quiz Bowl, like anybody who's into Quiz Bowl is probably also like a secret otaku,
right?
Or maybe not even not so secret. So it's like, so he's good at those types of questions.
Yeah.
So he has a very specific niche, and I like that too because it was actually built up over the course of the episodes without really beating your head on it or beating you over the head with it. And this episode kind of established, okay, these are what, like, every person on this team has an established role.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that a lot when everybody on the team, like, kind of feels like they have a sense of purpose for being there. And, I like how they had some undertones there, like, with, like, kind of building up more backstory for the characters. We don't know what's going on with Sasajima and this one girl who's really into electronics.
Yeah, you see her riding in on the back of his bike, and everyone's wondering who she is, but everyone's also afraid to ask them what the nature of their relationship.
Right. Like,
this is partly paralleled because Koshiyama shows up riding on the back of Fukami's bike, and so then everybody starts making assumptions about them, and they're like, oh, it's not true, it's not anything, whatever. But of course, they're doing the same thing to Sasajima.
Right, exactly. And, I like the stuff that, I like having this implication that there's more going on with Fukami. Like, I really do appreciate having a character like Fukami, like having a female character like her, who seems to have her own very well-established backstory for the team. She's just not one of the girls, it's like, oh, I love Quiz Bowl, but I don't want to compete with the boys, that we kind of see a lot. Like,
yeah.
She has her own very rich story. Like, Koshiyama's probably, like, the more generic character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's there to be, the eyes of someone with no experience, learning everything for the first time on the viewer's behalf. But Fukami, she's got a lot coming into this, and I think the revelation that she has an older brother who's in Quiz Bowl at a boys' academy, is an interesting one for two characters. Because one, it shows that Fukami got into Quiz Bowl probably because he went to school with him. So it's not clear what made Sasajima leave that team, and exactly what is he trying to accomplish with the Buzo.
Right, it's like there's a very rich history to all of these characters. Like, and I think that's really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I like learning more. It's like, I actually enjoy learning more about these characters. I enjoy this sort of mystery that they're building up because, they put in the work to make you care about these people.
I agree. Do we want to discuss the one thing we're not sure whether or not we care about?
Yeah, you go on ahead and do it, because I think you're more opposed to it than I am.
Yeah, so at the end of the episode, they have this sequence where the mystery girl who is riding on Sasajima's bike, she shows up in the library, and she asks if she can have some of Koshiyama's lunch, because she spent all her money on circuits, I guess, and didn't have money for lunch, and so Koshiyama's like, yeah, I wasn't going to eat it all anyway, so she eats his lunch, and they're sitting closely, and then Fukami shows up, and she's like, oh, what's going on?
Right.
And she reacts a little dramatically to seeing some other girl eating Koshiyama's lunch. And so she runs away, and as she runs away, she says, I haven't even eaten your lunch yet. And I immediately
I know,
groaned.
I was there for that.
Well, you weren't there. We were simul watching, and so I groaned because I love what they're doing with Fukami's character. I didn't want her just to sort of devolve into being someone who's super into Koshiyama for no reason. The only mitigating factor was that right after that she says, "Wait, what do I mean by that?" So clearly she doesn't even understand why she's reacting the way she is. So the thing I like about that, I guess, is that it's not as though she has been pining for Koshiyama in secret or something. It's that she doesn't understand her own feelings, which I guess is probably the fundamental, status of being a teenager, right?
And I guess I don't really mind it either, because I did kind of feel like over the course of these past couple of episodes that they've been built... I kind of figured that they were going to be building for something between Koshiyama and Fukami. And so, on one hand, it's kind of refreshing to see them dealing with it so early on. On the other hand, I do know what you mean. There is kind of something like, are we really doing main male and main female together, character together, already? Have we really gotten to the point where that's going to be an effectively, believable scenario for the two of them? I appreciate that Fukami the beginning of this episode had, Fukami talking to Koshiyama and kind of airing some of her grievances about... how the other kids in the class probably think she's a weirdo and that Koshiyama's the only one who doesn't seem to think so. She's kind of trying to get Koshiyama to be you don't think that of me, right? You don't think I'm a weirdo for it, right? Koshiyama, he's a little afraid to respond at first, and then as she's walking away, he manages to kind of cheer her up a little bit. So, again, I don't think it's unearned from her. I appreciate that they've actually shown these two characters attempting to, they are communicating with one another. They do talk about their problems with one another.
Yeah, they both are kind of odd ducks who are figuring out how to, be social and be in high school. And, it's not natural or easy for either of them.
Right,
and
but still have this very...
Go ahead.
But, yes, still have this very nerd... they want to be social, they want to be, liked by their classmates, but at the same time, they have a very... let's face it, a very nerdy, hobby. That's what they really love to do. They like studying trivia.
Yeah. Here's some other trivia for you, Matt.
Oh?
Did you know that Clean Freak Aoyama-kun is still airing despite everything we've wished for?
I don't know if that's really trivia, but I mean...
Did you know that this is a sentence that I'm saying?
Matt, you're starting to slip on your sentences, okay? I tried to cover for you before, but you're slipping.
Oh, darn. Well, then I guess you can take over.
Okay, well, fine. So this is episode 4 of Clean Freak Aoyama. This is not about Aoyama. This is about a dude named Narita, who is also another clean freak, but his difference is that he won't show it to everybody. He refuses to let anybody know about his obsessive-compulsive disorder. And so the entire episode is about him sort of silently competing with Aoyama. Aoyama seems to accept him, or, everybody seems to accept Aoyama, but nobody seems to really notice or care about Narita. The very end of the episode has this whole controversy where somebody appears to have stolen the girl's gym clothes. Everybody naturally assumes it was Narita because he's the only one who comes in so early in the morning. And Narita, he's trying to deny it, but nobody believes him. Aoyama saves him by finding the clothes because they were put in a different locker. And that's kind of where it ends. There's this whole subplot as well about Narita playing this online game and thinking somebody is Aoyama, but he's too weird to be Aoyama. Turns out he is Aoyama.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, but also nothing going on.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a lot of different plots, and I wrote down almost nothing from the episode because I was still, I was just sitting there watching, and I'm like, what do I do with any of this,
Right, what's this story?
So the first question that I wanted to ask you is, Is this a sports anime?
I mean, it is. We have a tournament structure to the series. They've already shown that.
Except there was literally no soccer balls in this one.
I mean, sure, but I mean, it's not like every episode of March Comes In Like a Lion had, like, Ray playing chess.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, but
Shogi! Oh my god.
Yeah. It felt like there was at least some character progression. This one, I mean, how often are we going to see Narita in this show that we need to just spend the 4th episode discussing the fact that other people are germophobic too, and apparently it gives you superpowers of cooking. So, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff you couldn't even bring up because it's just this series of randomness. Like, there's a whole scene where the entire school ditches class because they smell how good Aoyama's pork miso soup is, and they forcibly occupy the home ec classroom until Narita and Aoyama can feed all of them with produce stolen from the cafeteria. Which, I mean, you get to the end of it and you're like, why did any of that happen?
Why do I care about any of this? And the answer is I don't. It makes sense in the context of it being a comedy, I guess, but the problem is the jokes aren't funny.
None of it's funny. It's like the fat guy smells food and wants to eat a lot of it, and then everyone else smells food and wants to eat a lot of it.
Right, like, where's
That's the whole joke.
Like, there's another one. It's, like, Narita starts reaching out to Aoyama a little bit after their little weird, like, passive-aggressive cooking battle.
Yeah.
And he asks Aoyama, like, Aoyama made him a little bit of, like, cocoa or coffee or something like that. And in the foam, he drew a little animal in it. And it was, and, like, what Narita said, he goes, teach me how to make a raccoon in the foam, or with the foam. Aoyama's response is, it's a cat. Commercial break.
Yeah.
Like that was their big punchline that they ended the first half of the episode on.
Yeah.
Like, was that a joke?
Aoyama's bad at drawing cats?
Or, like, Narita thought that was a raccoon? Like, neither one of those jokes is all that funny. Like,
well, it's not at all funny. It's unbelievable. And
it's treating it as a punchline, but there's no punchline to it.
Exactly. There's nothing to it. Yeah, and they have this totally manufactured conflict at the end of the episode where a girl can't find her gym clothes, and they are convinced that someone must have stolen them out of her locker. They accuse Narita because he's the first one there, so he's the only one who could do it without anyone seeing it, and they're all like, oh yeah, he's creepy, and then all the boys tackle him, and Aoyama shows up having retrieved them from somewhere else because he's Aoyama, and he just knows the answer to every question.
Pretty much.
And again, all it does is Aoyama is like, oh, do you want a towel to clean up, fellow clean freak? And he doesn't say that, but he just implies it.
Right.
And then Narita's like, what are you talking about? I will never reveal who I am. And so we get to the end of the episode, and what have we learned? Narita exists.
Right.
And Aoyama may or may not play an online RPG in which he has a very different personality.
No, I think that was confirmed because so there was the subplot in that with that RPG was that Aoyama, like, there was something built up about how Narita had, like, this engraved keychain of sorts that had, like, his character name on it.
So the long story short, because it sucks, is by the end of the episode he sees that there's a keychain from the game and Aoyama has it, and his character nickname matches the guy that Narita met online, but apparently, you know, Aoyama's online personality is totally different from his real life personality, right. And I don't know how Aoyama has time to, like, be obsessive about video games and, like, a professional tier soccer player and cook all his meals and show up early for school so we can clean the classroom. And, they're just turning him into a superhero with the most random and pointless powers.
Right. Like, I will say, because I think the point of that online game was to show that, like, that entire sequence was to show that Aoyama is, like, trapped by his OCD. Like, this is, like, his online persona is supposed to be who he would be if he wasn't so obsessive-compulsive. Apparently. That's what, like, Narita was saying. Like, but, like, that's not interesting?
Yeah.
Like, I don't... Like, that would be interesting maybe if I cared more about Aoyama, but this is a comedy. Like, this is about goofy situations.
Yeah, and also the show has given me no reason to, like, treat Aoyama like a fully human character. You know, they treat him as a setup for gags. They don't really treat him like a person. Yeah, exactly. And it's like... And first, it's so... In that regard... It fails as a character study because I don't care about the character. As a gag comedy, it fails because that's the weakest punchline. Oh, this guy who looks like Aoyama, like, but acts weird. But it's Aoyama after all! Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I thought it would have been funnier if it was some sort of weird Aoyama fanboy who was, like, pretending to be Aoyama. Again, I understand the point, but it can't decide if it wants to go full comedy or, like, full drama, like a full character study of somebody with obsessive-compulsive tendencies.
Yeah, and again, at the end of the day, the problem remains that they're treating his germophobia, or whatever they want to call it that week, as a gag, not as a real issue that he deals with, really. You know?
Right.
But one thing I do really want to deal with, really, is episode 17 of Big Wind-Up.
Well, then why don't you talk about it?
Well, then why don't you talk about it? I will.
Good. I'm glad.
Sorry, when you said that, I was thinking of, like, you know, when kids say, you know, well, why don't you marry it? Like, oh, if you love Big Wind-Up so much, why don't you marry? You know, so.
Right. No, I hear you.
So here we are, and here I go. So we're at the top of the fourth inning against Tosei. Abe and Momoe sort of reflect, and they come to the conclusion that Tosei has been striking out on purpose. They're trying to see as many pitches as possible just to learn about how Mahashi pitches. So they feel like there's about to be a turn in the game. Nishiura gets up to bat, but they're not able to get any hits off of Junta. He's becoming less predictable with his sequencing. And so when Tosei comes back up to bat, they're given this sort of rant/motivational speech by their coach, telling them just to hit ground balls and make it difficult for them to field because the ground is so wet. They come up and they're able to get some people on by bunting and stealing, so their whole strategy of hitting it hard is sort of given way to hitting it as soft as possible and trying to just beat them out with a sprint. By the end of the episode, Tosei has runners on second and third. They get a very light hit straight back to Mahashi, but he's able to dive, throw the ball home, and get the runner out. So now there's 2 outs with runners on first and second, but the inning isn't over yet.
So I think my main takeaway from this episode was that it kind of, like, in one way, it built up Mihashi a lot because he kind of saved their butt at the end. Like, he's been kind of saving them a lot, actually. I've noticed throughout the entire course of this game. Like, because, you know, in last episode, it was him who kind of faked them out and, like, you know, it was kind of his weird, like, sort of crazy fake out with the, with getting into the pickle and allowing, the one runner to steal home. Yeah, Hanai.
Yeah.
And then this episode, like, they were prepping, like, the entire basis of this episode was Momoe building up Abe to be like, you need to make the call to let them steal a run. Like, we can give up one, but only one, and I'll let you make that call. And this episode ends with Mihashi making it so that they did not have to actually give up that run. Like, they still have some wiggle room. And I like that build up of Mihashi. Like, you know, he's finally, like, after all of, like, this self doubt that we've seen him go through, like, we're actually starting to see him, like, you know, this is a really talented player.
Right.
But what I also like about it is that it also shows his weakness, his biggest weakness. So we've seen how his slow pitches have been, have been a major asset for the team. This episode actually sort of slyly showed how they're also a weakness, because it makes steals are very effective against him.
Yeah, exactly. Because he throws so slow, they have a lot more time to make a steal than against a normal pitcher.
Right. He can still pick them off sometimes. You know, he can kind of keep them in check, but, like, if they actually go for the steal, he can't make that throw to, like, get it to base fast enough. Or he may be able to, but it's a lot slower than, like, if he had a faster pitch.
Right.
And, you know, I kind of appreciate that. About, like, we're starting to get more and more into, you know, this entire series has been building up Mihashi as somebody who has just not had enough confidence in himself. We're kind of now at a point where we're able to, okay, he's not perfect.
Yeah. And it was interesting, too. I feel like they're going to start realizing that because Mihashi has such good control, they can actually start to predict his pitches a little better, because he's going to hit his spots. Right. So as long as they can figure out where he's trying to pitch, there's no randomness to it, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, they're going to start figuring him out here soon. So, you know, it's starting to get to be game time, like, real game time. Like, Nishiura has done a great job kind of showing off, but there's Tosei starting to actually get into this game now.
Well, yeah, it's basically that Nishiura had an advantage at the beginning because they did their homework. Right. But Tosei has started to figure out exactly what Nishiura knows about them, and they can start adjusting to it.
Right, exactly. Like there's this whole sequence where the coach is, like, just absolutely losing it with the entire team. The coach of Tosei. Yeah. You know, kind of, he's just sort of screaming them silly, but, you know, there's kind of this moment where he realizes, like, you know, they're only realizing just now just how much they've put into this game. Like, these are not kids who were that intimidated by them, as I'm assuming they probably thought, you know, these are some no-name punks. They're not going to put any effort into this game, because, you know, they know who we are, and they're just not going to try.
Right.
Like, because that was their assumption. It's like, these are no-name punks, they're not going to try. We're a big-name school, why would they even think that they stand a chance against us?
It is interesting, too, the strategy they take once they decide to get serious, is to, instead of focusing on getting strong hits, they're focusing on locating ground balls. So they're actively trying to keep the ball within the infield.
Right.
Which is... It's interesting from a baseball perspective, because for professional players, that's a really dumb strategy, because if you're hitting ground balls, it's a lot easier to field those, and it's a lot easier to get out based on ground balls. The one thing that mitigates that is that they recognize these are 16-year-olds. So 16-year-olds are not necessarily as effective in the infield as professional players are, right?
Right.
So they figure if they can just keep getting balls, you know, avoid getting struck out, keep getting balls in play on the ground, they'll be able to beat out enough infield hits, and they'll be able to move runners along, and they'll score kind of like a drip by drip, one at a time, but, you know, make this a steady thing where the infield can't keep up with them. So I'm kind of torn on it, because it, you know, Japanese baseball has a negative reputation of being too focused on bunting and, like, slap ground hits. And you saw a lot of that in this episode, but, you know, at the end of the day, bunting and ground balls are not usually very effective. But maybe for this high school team playing in the rain against 16-year-olds, it actually might be a better strategy. So I don't know.
Right. It gives you kind of that perspective as to why they may actually have that mentality. Yeah. Like, you know, this is what makes sense. I also did like, in this episode, they did show how bunting is not always super effective.
Right.
Like, it's not always just, like, a guaranteed hit. Like, you have that... because somebody bunts and they just get it at a wrong angle and it just sort of pops up.
Yeah, exactly. It can just become a lazy pop-up and it's an easy thing to field.
Right. Yeah.
But Anyway, I thought it was good, but I am interested to see what it sets up in terms of there's going to be a turn and there's going to be some real strategy changes on both sides. So I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah.
And Matt, would you like to tell me and everyone how Welcome to the Ballroom went?
I might be willing to do that. So, to respond to my earlier sentiments, no, I'm actually not looking forward to Welcome to the Ballroom this week. So, episode 4 covers Hyodo totally nailing the competition. After Fujita had subbed in for him, his final routine is the tango, and he just absolutely crushes this routine with Shizuku, despite his injured leg. However, as it turns out, Sengoku kind of messed up because he really should not have sent out Fujita to fill in because he totally got caught. And that was totally illegal. And as a result, Hyodo gets banned for competitions for the next few months. For the next 6 months, actually. Fujita tries to go to the hospital to apologize to Hyodo, but when he gets there, Hyodo has actually abandoned his room. But he ends up running into Iwakuma before, who would actually come to visit him and tells him about how he tried to talk to Hyodo before the competition, but before he had a chance to, he fell down the stairs. Anyway, we find out Fujita is very frustrated with himself because he feels responsible for what happened to Hyodo because he was so compelled to compete in the ballroom dance that he desperately wanted to go out there. So, the episode ends, actually, we find out Hyodo was actually coming to visit to Fujita, and he basically gives Fujita his blessing to keep competing in his place. Essentially, basically, he wants to make sure Shizuku is able to keep competing, essentially. He tells him to take care of her, essentially. Okay, so, when we started Welcome to the Ballroom, I was really excited for this. It seemed like it was gonna be, like, a really fun series, and it seems like it is decently well popular. I really want to like it. I really do. I have so many problems with this series, though, that okay, so, my biggest issue is Sengoku right now. You know, when he was first introduced, he seemed like he was going to be a really fun, sort of overly abrasive character, you know, the sort of kind of like a man's man ballroom dancer. Kind of seemed like he was almost going to be like this great teacher Onizuka type character, who, you know, he kind of had this sort of outside vision of the ballroom dancing world, and he was going to kind of pass on his knowledge into Fujita, even though he was kind of like a giant man-child himself and didn't really want to relinquish that. This, like, last episode was already kind of setting in some uncomfortable things about him, about how just sort of, like, overly brutish he kind of was with Shizuku. This one kind of follows up on that by being just kind of a jerk to Fujita. Like, he's constantly passing blame onto him this entire episode, being like, well, it's your fault. Like, how could you do this to Hyodo? You know, they kind of play it up a little bit as a joke because, you know, it's like, yeah, well, I mean, obviously he was the one who suggested to him in the first place to do it. Ha ha. But, no, I feel like the episode is really trying to get us to side with Sengoku on this. Because, like, he genuinely seems to believe that, yeah, Hyodo is gonna break his leg now because Fujita sort of inspired this in him. And Fujita is actually gonna take the blame on this. Because he ends up saying to Iwakuma, it's like, it was my fault, because, like, I really wanted to go out there and compete, and I really shouldn't have in the first place. Even though Sengoku was trying to push him into it. Like, Fujita tried to get out of doing it last episode, but Sengoku was really pushing him to do it. And as we discover in this episode, for really no reason. Like, it would have maybe made some sense if, like, he was afraid of, like, the reputation to their club, to their dance club, or to their dance hall, rather, because, you know, because, I don't know, like, Hyodo losing the competition might have some effect on, like, their sponsorship, or, like, some of their normal support, or something like that. No, the punishment was entirely on Hyodo that happened here. Like, Hyodo's the one who gets banned. Sengoku doesn't even get any punishment for it. Like, there's nothing that happens to this ballroom studio because of Hyodo losing or getting banned. This, like, everything bad that happens is to Hyodo and Fujita. And the fact that Sengoku is sort of pushing off these issues onto them as being their fault, when he needlessly was pushing them to do this in the first place, it really irritates me. Like, I get it's supposed to be a joke to an extent. But the fact that the episode sort of resolves with Fujita being forgiven by Hyodo makes me believe that the series is seriously trying to push that, yeah, Fujita flubbed up there. And it's like, it's really not his fault. I think one other issue I'm having with the series, kind of moving on here from my Sengoku rant, is that, again, we've talked about this a little bit, we don't have enough understanding about ballroom dancing. You know, it wouldn't be a big deal if this was mostly focused on the character drama. I think Dive this season, for example, we've kind of mentioned that as being kind of our surprise hit of the season. Well, not really. I mean, between us, not in, actual popularity, but I think that Dive can kind of get away with not really teaching us that much about diving. I don't really know what makes a great dive in that, outside of, I don't know, it looks flashy and there's not much of a splash. I don't know much about the mechanics of it or anything like that, but I understand it because it's not really important to the narrative. In Welcome to the Ballroom, we have all these, comments during Hyodo's big routine about how amazing this dance is, about just how spectacular it is. And I don't understand a lick of it. There's this whole section in there where somebody comments out in the stands, oh, he hopped during a tango. Can you believe it? I don't know. Is that big for tango? Is that a tango faux pas? Is that some sort of revolutionary move? I don't know how the tango works. I'm pretty maybe just maybe if this was soccer or some sort of universal sport that most people understand. Soccer, or in Japan, baseball, something like that, where there's just this sort of inherent knowledge of all the positions, fine. I could maybe go along with that. But ballroom dancing is not a well-known competition. It's not that mainstream. It's kind of this sort of niche activity, and they keep pushing all of this, they're trying to they're constantly commenting on how amazing this ballroom dancing is, and commenting on certain things that are supposed to be amazing during it. I don't understand why they are, though, because I don't understand the mechanics of it. And it's very frustrating as a viewer to constantly feel like the series is sort of talking over me about this. It's just sort of hey guys, get it? It's amazing. You're trying to show, not tell, but it's not working. You do need to have a little bit of tell in there. I guess they're trying to lean somewhat on the animation, which is generally still pretty impressive to sort of convey how incredible this is. But that only works so far, especially because this is not ballroom dancing is kind of supposed to be this elegant sort, that's sort of the image I have of ballroom dancing in my head. It's this sort of elegant activity. Or, in some cases, like the tango, it's a sort of intense, passionate, movement. And they're not really putting in the work to convey that. I think the series is sort of stuck in between trying to tell a character drama and trying to tell a sports series, and it's kind of trying to do both, and it's not meeting either one in either way. It's not joining these two concepts together. It's kind of stuck in the middle, and it's sort of getting split down the middle, and it doesn't know how to resolve this, I feel like. I feel like the only really interesting character is Hyodo, and it feels like he's about to leave now. There was a sort of big goodbye from him to Fujita, basically being this sort of passing of the torch moment between the two of them. And that's a shame, because I'm way more interested in Hyodo's story than I am in Fujita. I really don't care about Fujita. I really don't get his deal. I kind of get what they're going for Fujita. I know what he wants, but I've talked about this a lot, but I don't understand why he wants that entirely. One final, just quick note I want to make here, kind of going along the lines of this whole, like, character drama, not, like, trying to convey a sports series. This series is showing, like, these gigantic stadium halls for ballroom dancing, and, like, how it like, you know, they have all these people out in the stands commenting about how amazing Kyoto's dance is. Again, I kind of feel like ballroom dancing is sort of a niche activity, even for, like, big competitions. I don't feel like you're going to get these gigantic, sprawling stadium halls for it, where you get, like, tens of thousands of people watching. I kind of feel like you're going to get, I don't know. Maybe because this is, like, a giant competition, I guess. But I also kind of feel like most, like, in that sort of situation, the people who are going to be going to that are not necessarily going to understand the mechanics of ballroom dancing. I mean, they're going to see the flashy stuff, but again, everybody in the stands is just sort of commenting, "Oh wow, you know, this is what they're doing." Like, "Wow, I can't believe they just did that." And it's like the audience during these sorts of games sort of tends to play as a stand-in for the viewer to kind of they're kind of going along the journey with you, sort of they sort of vocalize your own thoughts, and I kind of feel like they're not doing their job in that regard. The series is kind of failing to predict how the viewer is actually going to be understanding these moment-to-moment situations. And I think that might be where my big problem is. Matt, last episode, kind of commented on how the series feels like we're, like, 6 episodes in and we are only on episode 4. But hey, speaking of extra episodes, why don't I talk about Welcome to the Ballroom episode 5? Okay, so we had kind of an unforeseen issue this week. We did not realize that Welcome to the Ballroom was going to have 2 episodes this week. Largely because that doesn't happen. I don't think we have ever actually had a week where they just decided to air 2 episodes of the same series. There have been some times when we had to play catch-up for certain series, but we've never had it where they've actually aired 2 episodes. So I'm going to be doing double duty and doing episode 5 on my own as well. Okay, so this episode begins where the last one left off. I didn't mention it in my summary for episode 4, but the episode ends with a mysterious girl rushing into the dance club, telling Shizuku to be careful, and this guy bursts in basically proclaiming that he's going to be Shizuku's partner now that Hyodo's done with. His name is Gaju. He is a decent dancer. He has been ranked in, like, I think around 5 or so in certain cups, but has not been able to pursue any further. So thus he very boldly proclaims Shizuku is going to be his partner, and she does. She gives in. She's more than happy to do it, apparently. She is actually very sick of Hyodo, because he is constantly concealing his feelings. Not only that, she's very upset with Sengoku because she has figured out that Sengoku was purposely trying to sabotage Hyodo last episode, or over the Mikasa Cup competition that we just saw, by forcing Fujita to go out and basically get Hyodo permanently disqualified to an extent so that he wouldn't be able to compete anymore. So what we discover is that Mako, Gaju's sister, really wants to dance with Fujita because he is apparently much more considerate than her brother, and her brother and Gaju will not be Mako's partner unless she gets a lot better, until she gets better than Shizuku, and for the first time, Fujita manages to boldly proclaim that he will be Mako's partner, and that they will together take down Gaju. Okay, so I have a confession to make. When I recorded this stuff on episode 4, I had not seen this episode yet. I went ahead and took a break. I recorded that one, came back, watched the new one, the new episode 5, and then came back to record this. I thought I had the series figured out, almost. Like, not like what it all means, necessarily. Like, I kind of figured out that I wasn't going to like it, and then I got this episode, and suddenly I'm a lot more positive on it. I do have some small issues, I'll get into those for a moment, but I think what I like about this is that we finally have an established goal here. Fujita needs to take down Gaju. Great. We finally got to see some character growth from Fujita as well. He's finally starting to take some initiative, because he actually does agree to Mako. He actually does very proudly state He's gonna take down Gaju. Like, that's his goal. He wants to show Mako that she can be as good as Shizuku. Great. Okay, finally, I have a reason to cheer for them. Because, frankly, they really do a great job of portraying Gaju as kind of a prick. In fact, if I'm gonna be honest, I don't know. Maybe this is something that everybody in the Welcome to the Ballroom fandom has mentioned. Maybe I've just been stupid and haven't noticed this until just this episode. This is a relationship metaphor, isn't it? Like, Shizuku and Hyodo were kind of this inseparable couple. Shizuku couldn't take Hyodo's crap anymore, finally breaks it off with him, and now, while she's emotionally damaged, we get this sort of cocky, like, jerk sort of trying to take advantage of her vulnerability and sort of struts in and tries to catch her on the rebound, and her, being kind of emotionally confused, agrees. So Fujita kind of needs to learn to step it up so he can finally kind of protect Shizuku. I don't know how I actually feel about that, to be honest. I think it's a little outdated, if I'm going to be frank here. I don't really like the idea that everybody's sort of disregarding Shizuku's own feelings on this matter. Like, you know, maybe this is something she just needs to do for her to kind of get over Hyodo at first. But, you know what? Honestly, I'm still okay. I'm mostly okay with it because the series doesn't necessarily have to go in that direction, because honestly, from what I've seen, it feels like Fujita and Mako make a better pairing than Fujita and Shizuku anyway. I'm not going to get into pairing wars here, okay? I'm just saying that from what I've seen, Mako, they seem to be more supportive of one another than Shizuku has been to Fujita. Like, she sort of feels like she's supposed to be this sort of unattainable goal, and I don't like the idea that Shizuku is sort of being placed in this sort of trophy position. Like, you know, this is supposed to, like, Shizuku is the natural end goal, but he's going to get with the hot girl at the very end. And, you know, but the series doesn't necessarily have to go that way. They've had some implications that Shizuku is kind of getting sick of being sort of, having her feelings sort of cast by the wayside, especially because of Sengoku's thoughtlessness by, you know, not even talking to her about this manner. And I don't feel like, you know what, I'm gonna get into this real quick as well. I appreciate the fact that we finally got to see some comeuppance for Sengoku based on his actions from the previous episode. I like the fact that Tamaki is finally, like, sort of, like, calling him out on his garbage. Like, she's like, yeah, you know what, you're gonna teach Mako and Fujita how to do this dance because it was your fault for Fujita having to step in the first place. Okay, great. Finally, I feel like Sengoku is starting to become more of a real person. Somebody who can actually be controlled by somebody. Somebody who, you know, Tamaki is clearly the one that he responds to. And you know what? I'm glad that not everybody is just willing to, like, kind of let him be, like, basically act as king of the dance studio and sort of let him have his own way. I appreciate having that sort of balance with Tamaki. And I think that works out a lot better. Otherwise, yeah, I'm more excited now for Welcome to the Ballroom after this episode. I do feel like you could have done some of this a little bit earlier. I'm not entirely sure why it took so long to even get into this. Like, I feel like they could have done a lot of Sengoku's explanation, or at least his reasoning for why he had Fujita sub in for Hyodo, like, at the moment, like, maybe some implications there, because I feel like we're sort of, like, only now am I finally understanding everything that's been going on. I still don't really quite get how the dance works, but I'm more comfortable now with the idea, because this episode did show they showed more dancing and how it somewhat works, about how Fujita takes the lead with her and how his keen eye is sort of how he's able to do these maneuvers. You know, how he's able to sort of respond to her emotion. Like, I feel like we finally have something of a basis now for the series to expand upon. Again, I would have liked a lot more of this sooner. Fujita's keen eye has always been sort of implied based on his, you know, discussions with his grandma and announcing things from the sumo matches and everything. But I don't know. I don't feel like all of my complaints from last episode have necessarily gone away. I feel like the series could be doing more work, or should have done more work for us to get to this point before this episode. But you know what? Now that we're here, I'm happy with it. Could keep improving on itself, but you know what? I'm actually excited now. And speaking of things I'm actually not really that excited for, let's talk about Dive Episode 4. So this episode largely covers just a practice session that Tomo has with a bunch of the other boys from different diving clubs. The major one that we get in this episode is Atsuhiko. He is a very talented diver who has proclaimed himself to be a rival of Yoichi. However, his biggest issue is that he does kind of get a bit of stage fright. He kind of gets overwhelmed by competition, and that kind of gets to his nerves. Not only that, but otherwise, you get three other characters. You get like Jiro, who apparently who clearly attempts very flashy dives, but he's never really quite able to succeed. You have Matsuno, who's technically impressive, who's technically very qualified, but isn't a very flashy or interesting diver. And then you get Toshihiko, who seems to be sort of the everyman, the sort of like, I don't know, I didn't really get a great sense of his personality, to be honest, in this episode. The episode ends, though, with Tomo coming upon one of his friends from the diving club, who has finally sort of lost it after trying to talk to Coach Asaki about maybe teaching him the 3.5 dive that she's teaching Tomo, and she won't let him do it, or she won't teach him because frankly he's not ready for it. So he finally loses it on Tomo, and basically tells him, like, I'm so sick of your naivete, like, you're so optimistic and think that everything is going, like, because you're having this great experience with diving, everybody else is having this great experience. You don't seem to understand how ruthless and, like, heartless the world of competition is. You're really impressed by these other, like, colorful personalities. Guess what? They're all in it to win it, okay? So maybe, maybe sort of, like, get over yourself, okay? Overall, I did not care for this episode. I thought that this was a bit of a weaker one, except for the ending, which I will get into later. So I think Dive has generally worked at its best when it's stayed kind of true to life. I don't think it works very well when it tries to go into a bit more of a tropey anime route. It sort of belittles the sort of grounded feel that the series has been able to keep up for this long. So what I mean by that is I think Atsuhiko is probably the most emblematic of this, or symbolic rather. He's too much of a character, I feel like, because his whole thing is that he's super confident, he's super boisterous, and yet, but, he has this sort of goofy trope where, the way they portray it, with the sort of, like, comedic overreactions, the sort of, like, super deformed nature that he sort of assumes whenever he's getting ignored by Yoichi, or, the way his sort of stage fright is sort of comedically portrayed, with him just sort of completely freezing up and being super nervous all the time. It feels weird saying this for an anime, but it's too anime, almost. Like, it kind of cuts into the believability and the sort of... It's hard for me to buy into this world after, it's put in all this work to kind of get you to kind of believe in all of these different characters. Believe that these could actually be real people, and then you have these you kind of have this sort of almost walking trope come in and sort of like, sort of intrude on the series, and his lifelong rivalry with Yoichi, and how it's like, this story is not that interesting, okay? I've seen it before, and it's not really doing anything new with it. The only thing I will say is that I did appreciate that Yoichi did mention how talented Atsuhiko is, but that he just, I do like the stage fright aspect, because that is a thing, there are some genuinely talented people out there who, who aren't as good as they could be just due to nerves, I think that's a fine angle. the series has built itself up enough that I'm willing to give it a bit of the benefit of the doubt that they may explore that a little bit later. As it is, though, I kind of feel like this episode sort of knocked down some of my impressions I have had with the series. There's also this whole thing, with the other characters who are there as well and that you spend most of the time with. They kind of go into them a little bit, Matsuno kind of has this whole thing about how, he's second place all the time, which sounds like it wouldn't be too bad, except, he never is actually getting what he wants, which is to actually win. Which, again, is nice, I guess, but, again, I don't know. I don't really know who these characters who are meant to be purposely boring, it's such a hard line to tread. To actually, because their entire point is to be boring. How do you make that interesting when they're supposed to be boring? The only time I can even think of that's worked is the main character in Baby Steps, but, that's maybe a discussion for another time. But I will say, what brought it right back up for me, though, is that ending with that discussion between Tomo and his friend, because I think that kind of brought back that sort of more realistic feel to it. It almost kind of felt like it was using this, the first, 3/4 of the episode to sort of build up this almost sort of anime fantasy land. Oh, look at all these grand personalities who are in swimming. Doesn't this look fun? And I kind of like that sort of sense of reality that his friend brought in. It's look, these guys seem like they're cool guys to you, I'm sure, but, they are going to be just as cutthroat as all of them because they are all set out to one thing, and that is to win. And you got to get over yourself and thinking that everybody's just having this grand old buddy time playing diving group with one another. And what I like about that too is that you kind of see where he's, that he's overreacting because he's not necessarily deserving, I guess. Okay, so he has already been built up as, he's not putting in the effort himself. However, what does work, but so, that he's kind of overreacting as a result, because, he's not actually putting in any of the work. So, he's not exactly coming from he's not exactly coming from a place of knowledge himself because, he's not actually he's not doing what Tomo's at least trying to do. At the same time, you do understand where he's coming from because he's not wrong. Tomo needs a sense, Tomo is sort of losing himself in his diving and he's not really seeing the reality in front of him. I like that, I almost kind of like that sort of generic anime that they were sort of building up there for a little bit, only to kind of drive us right back home to sort of cut through our expectations there. I kind of get why the series doesn't work for a lot of people, because it's not the most interesting anime out there. It's not the most colorful one, and it's not the most, immediately impressive one, because, the animation's not exactly standout. The boys are probably a little too young for, free type fans to, really sort of get into or anything like that. But, I weirdly enough, even though I thought this episode wasn't great, I think this was sort of a great standout episode for me as well, simply because of that speech at the end, and kind of why I'm sort of you know what, maybe check this out, almost based on how it's trying to cut your expectations like that. Okay, cool. Well, I think that actually kind of wraps it up for me this week. Thanks for being on our question of the week, Stephanie. Thanks for the questions again, Matt L. We always do appreciate any questions that people send our way. I know I said this at the beginning of the episode, but I thought I'd just reiterate it at the end. Remember that email is KoshienCast@gmail.com. Matt and I will be back next week with a more normal episode. This has been kind of an interesting week for both of us here. Cool. So, hey, have a good one, guys.
Our logo design is by James Ratcliffe. The theme music is Fly High by Burnout Syndromes, covered and performed by Luke Bartka. You can follow KoshienCast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and our email is KoshienCast@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll be back next week with the best and worst from the world of sports anime, and until then, keep training.